Welcome back, everyone. This is the Oracle Decodes ETs, aliens, UFOs, and flying saucers. I don't know about you, but I've noticed over the past few weeks, from at least what we commonly call the end of August of 2020 into September as I'm recording this here, that there have been a whole lot more stories in the mainstream and alternative media sources ramping up about things like outer space phenomenon where astronomers are spotting meteors coming closer to Earth, and specifically a whole lot of stories about UFO sightings. We're looking here at an image of what, at least is to my generation, a very famous ET. And we're going to see how this ET from the 1982 film has a deeper hidden connection to another famous and much older outer spacey UFO alien themed story, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. Now, it's not just the same general theme that these stories share. It's also because they're corresponding to stories within them or about them about the same time of the year. And that's coming up soon in the next season on a date we commonly celebrate as Halloween. Now, back in what we commonly call October 30th of 1938, a now famous radio broadcast of Orson Welles' book, War of the Worlds, reportedly sent the general public into an uproar and mass panic. Believing, because the radio broadcast was performed by actors so well, pretending to break in with special bulletins about Earth being invaded by aliens, in New Jersey no less, that it was confused by the listeners to be real news, and a mass panic by those listeners who believed it that unfolded. This incident was later explained to be meant to be a trick for Halloween, and became a famous example of how to create a mass hysteria with mass media. And this is just one example of many stories that were designed for exactly the same purpose and continue on in an occulted way to this very day. 75 years after the War of the Worlds radio broadcast happened, NPR did an article that supposedly dug deeper into whether this mass hysteria that was reported was as mass as it was hyped up to be. And the article reported that of the 12 million people who were thought to have heard the broadcast, that about 1 in 12 of those people believed it to be true, and some percentage of those people, who knows how many of them, ran out of their homes. But note the connection right away, again with the number 12, the number corresponding to the known zodiac constellations you can find around the arc of the ecliptic. So we're going to take a look deeper now into these connections by seeing how they connect back to the present day, with a number of these stories lately about the ET, alien, and UFO theme. So once again, we've queued up a screenshot in Stellarium of what's happening in the sky story from the perspective of someone in what we commonly call America, looking up at that very special place in the sky we've been calling the real oracle or the real all-seeing eye. Now on the image, you're going to find the vertical green line called the north-south meridian line. This helps you when you're looking for the all-seeing eye or the real oracle by facing due south and paying attention to everything that rises in the east and sets in the west along that red arc on the ecliptic in the horizontal plane of the image. And that's called the arc of the ecliptic, where you're going to find all the known zodiac constellations, remember 12 of those, the sun, the moon, and all the known planets rise in the east and set in the west as they travel along. This special crossing point in the sky of the north-south meridian line and the arc of the ecliptic down to the Earth's horizon, we've discovered holds all the keys to unlocking the most famous stories on Earth, including this overall theme that we're decoding here, ETs and UFOs. But in these stories, they specifically correspond to a certain time of year. So we're starting with the date we commonly call March 13th of 2020, just so that we can take a good look at a couple of constellations that we're going to see are going to be some of the big stars in this show. So once again, we're taking note of the constellations of Auriga, rising in this image just above the Earth's horizon in the east, and the constellation as it's known nowadays as Cetus the Whale. So I wanted you to specifically get a good look at how the constellation of Cetus the Whale is shaped in the sky story before we advance to our next screenshot where we get into this decoding. So in our last decoding, remember, we left off when we were taking a look at the event of 9/11 and how that corresponds specifically with 9/11 being that time of year. So from that point, we've moved forward from another month from that point, taking a look at what's going on in the sky story from the perspective, again, from someone on the earth in what we commonly call America at the hour of sunrise, looking up at what we commonly call October 11th of 2020 and what's happening in the sky then. So it's going to be the constellation of Auriga. You can see by the way that it's shaped, will be playing in these stories the role of the spaceship, the UFO, or the spacecraft or flying saucer. And tie that recently to what we saw, that it was reported that the Pentagon formed a task force recently to investigate these UFO sightings by military personnel, as it was reported. So in that story, as in the 9/11 story, once again, you can see that the constellation of Auriga is playing double duty here and also playing the role of the Pentagon. Now, most of the common depictions of ETs or aliens that come out of the imagination and that come out of these UFOs or flying saucers in these stories are creatures we call commonly little green men nowadays. And they're usually depicted with big heads, long, thin bodies sometimes, but usually long, thin limbs, arms and legs, which could easily correspond and often does with the constellation of Taurus the Bull, as it's known nowadays. But taking that constellation of Taurus and how it's shaped in the sky, seeing how it visually connects with the constellation of Auriga, you can see also how there's double duty roles playing out again. You can see that the ET or alien theme with the long, thin arms and legs and big heads coming out of flying saucers or UFOs start to make sense in an even better way. But in this story, it's the constellation of Cetus the whale and the way that it's shaped, where you'll find one of the most famous of all space aliens from the 1982 film, E.T. The long, crooked neck of Cetus the whale corresponds, remember, to the neck of E.T.'s that he elongates and retracts back down into his shoulders throughout the film. You may also remember that the film E.T. starts out as E.T.'s spaceship leaves him behind here on Earth, for him to be discovered later by a boy named Elliot. And that's just before Halloween, a fact that the viewer is made aware of when Elliot tries to tell his family about seeing this ET, and his mom changes the subject at the dinner table by asking the kids what they've decided to dress up for Halloween. So our screenshot from Stellarium is taking us to that same time of year, showing us a picture of what's occurring at the hour of sunrise on the date we commonly celebrate as Halloween. It's right down to the cover art, as you're going to see, for the film E.T. Let's start out looking at Cetus the whale, as it's known nowadays, as it descends into the western horizon of the Earth at this time of year. Or in other words, E.T. has landed here on Earth. It's the hour of sunrise on Halloween, and you can also see that it's the full moon that's in alignment with Cetus, just above the western horizon as well. And comparing that to the cover art for the film E.T., you can see it's matched down to all the details. You can see that the constellation of Auriga on Halloween at the hour of sunrise is on its way descending into the western horizon of the Earth, matching with the story that E.T.'s spaceship landed and then left him. And for this decoding, it's going to be the constellation of Cetus that appears to be descended to the horizon of the Earth with only his head above the ground. E.T. in this decoding, right? Where this story centers around. And a boy who found him named Elliot. Elliot befriends E.T. And Elliot himself has a brother and a sister in the story. Elliot's brother and sister corresponding, as you can see, to the constellation of Gemini, or the twins, as they're known nowadays, sitting on top of the constellation of Orion's shoulder in the sky story. And the constellation of Orion then corresponding to Elliot, the boy who becomes not only E.T.'s friend in the E.T. story, but if you remember in the story, it's E.T. and Elliot who also share a strong, what could be described as an empathetic or telepathic connection. It's this bond or tie that was made as a correspondence in the ET story to the tie or the bond that exists in the sky story between these two constellations, as we've seen before. That tie between Cetus, or ET, and Orion, or Elliot, is the constellation known nowadays as Eridanus, the river. In the promotional art for the film E.T., you can see that it's Elliot and E.T. They're on a bicycle in the sky. And for this story, the constellation of Taurus the Bull, because of the way that it's shaped, was reimagined by the scriptwriters here to be the bicycle that E.T. and Elliot are riding through the sky on. And remember that the Halloween time of year in the E.T. story was reinforced when the kids that found E.T. end up dressing him up as a ghost and take him trick-or-treating. It's even in the detail of dressing E.T. up as a ghost that was carefully chosen. It's showing the correspondence of the location of the constellation of Cetus or E.T. this time of year, as Cetus is descended up to his head into the western horizon of the Earth in the sky story on what we commonly celebrate as Halloween. Or in other words, E.T. is becoming a ghost. And if you remember from the story, this is also foreshadowing E.T.'s coming decline towards his almost death, but then is revivified, remember, and at the end of the story rescued when E.T.'s spaceship or flying saucer returns to take him home. Throughout the film, there's also this theme of healing and regeneration or restoration, specifically with the bond established between Elliot and E.T. in the story, represented in a visual way by E.T.'s long finger glowing at the end of it, and with his touch can restore Elliot's cut finger to wholeness again. And this touches back to, as we've seen in previous decodings, the ancient Egyptian myths of Horus and his losing of one eye in the contendings of Horus and Set. That eye that Horus loses in the battle is restored and healed in many tellings of the myth, corresponding to the moon as it wanes and waxes, coming to wholeness over and over again. And that is why the connection was made with the moon being the eye of Horus and corresponding to healing and regenerative powers by the wearer of an amulet of the Eye of Horus, you may remember. The finger of Orion, the outstretched arm of the constellation of Orion, or Elliot in this E.T. story, is reaching out to the constellation of Cetus, as you can see, or E.T., in alignment at this time of the year with the restorative or healing power of the moon. And that is your connection, touching back to the myths from ancient Egypt. Now you know the real reason that the 1938 War of the Worlds radio broadcast was lined up with the holy day known as Halloween, as well as the story presented in the 1982 film with a similar theme, E.T. It's all corresponding with what's going on in the sky story once again. The same template for all of the most famous stories, no matter their theme. But we decided to take a look at this one now, since so many stories are running during this same time of year, this year in what we commonly call 2020, with this same ET UFO sighting theme, which was making Dee and I wonder lately a little bit more than jokingly between us whether Dorona, this invisible enemy narrative that has been pushed on us this past 6 months, was all just a test run, psychologically, to see if, with much better technology to produce mass illusions than was available in 1938 over the radio, if the same Liar Liar Pants on Fire Secret Drama Society cult would have a better outcome in what we commonly call 2020 in creating a very believable, yet still very fake alien invasion. Should we not be surprised if that's something we should be keeping an eye out for next? Because, as you see here, it just happens to be on the holy day we commonly celebrate as New Year's Eve at the hour of sunrise that we see that it is the last sunrise that you'll find all the stars of the constellation of Auriga above the western horizon of the Earth. After that, Auriga will be descending into the west, and what appears to be a spaceship may be landing on Earth, just in time for the new year. Is that what all these past 75 plus years of pushing so many alien and ET, flying saucer, and UFO narratives has been all about? Prepping the ground psychologically for the people to accept the advances of technology that would catch up to be able to pull off a believable fake alien invasion in the real sky? At this point, after all we've seen, I wouldn't be one bit surprised, especially when the real oracle can give us this kind of heads up. We'll end things here and pick it back up in our next decoding. Until then, be well.